It's happening all too frequently. Violent robberies up 15%. Homicides up 8%.
Talk to most residents in Saskatchewan's two largest cities, and they'll tell you crime is one of their biggest concerns.
We also have a list now of Canada's top 25 most wanted fugitives.
A recent industry report found 57% of BC small businesses were directly impacted by crime over the past year.
Overall crime, including violent crimes like homicides, intimate partner violence, and assaults, are happening at higher rates in rural areas compared to the big cities.
Adelina Iftene got into criminal law for the same reason many people do.
Well, I always say I came in for the thrill and I stayed for the human rights because that's criminal law. I think that everybody, going into law school a lot of times have one image of criminal law and they think it's going to be utterly fascinating. And it is, but it was for very different reasons than I thought it was going to be.
It wasn't the courtroom drama or the high-stakes cases that kept her attention. It was the often quiet, invisible machinery of the justice system and what it could do to people.
With the significant power of the state over the individual and its consequences.
Adelina came to Canada from Romania, a country that up until 1989 was under totalitarian rule. So she knows what it looks like when the criminal justice system isn't just flawed, but weaponized.
It's very easy to see how the slippery slope in the state power, and it's all within most of it is within the criminal justice system, because that's where we trust the state to protect us, and we give them the power over our rights and our liberties most. We entrust that they do so responsibly.
Today, she's a law professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax. She teaches pretty much everything at the crossroads of law, power, and freedom. And she works with people who don't usually get a say.
I work with incarcerated people. I work with people that are criminalized in various ways and look at issues regarding the impacts of the criminal justice system on the well-being of individuals and society more broadly.
And lately, Adelina's worried.
I am very concerned, let's put it that way, when I see the criminal justice system being used as a tool of oppression as opposed to a tool of vindication. And it's happening more and more, and certainly in Canada we see certain groups are being certainly targeted in various ways by the missteps of the criminal justice system. That's a concern.
So when I heard Adelina sounding the alarm on where Canada's crime policy is headed, I knew this wasn't some legal debate. It was a warning. Because right now, the conversation about crime, it's getting louder. But the conversation, she says, isn't getting smarter. This year, Prime Minister Mark Carney campaigned on a crackdown.
We will make bail harder to get for those charged with stealing cars using violence, stealing cars for a criminal organization, for home invasion, and for certain human trafficking and smuggling offenses.
Tougher bail, more police, a get tough agenda that the Liberals shoplifted right off the Conservative shelf. And now that the election's over, Carney's campaign promises could soon become law, funded by public money, enforced by police, and felt by real people in neighborhoods, cities, courts, and jails. So I sat down with Adelina and asked if Mark Carney's revival of tough on crime will fix anything. What actually makes communities safer? And what happens if we get this wrong? Let's get into it. When you hear politicians in Ottawa say things like, we need to get tough on crime, what goes through your mind?
It's always frustrating. It's never surprising. Let's put it like that. All my adult life, that's what I've heard. Every campaign, at least one of the parties, unfortunately more this time. The reality is that over the last decades, we have had mountains of evidence that's showing that being tough on crime is actually not achieving the result that politicians claim they do. It's not evidence-based. And that's actually very frustrating.
What does tough on crime even mean?
I suppose it could mean many things, but what it normally translates in, it means making it easier to put people in prison for longer periods of times for any kind of crimes, even sometimes very non-violent or less serious crimes. Now, obviously, one could say tough on crime could very easily mean that you're actually addressing the issues that are leading to people committing crime, and that's making you tough on crime. Like, for instance, you're addressing issues of poverty, you're addressing racism, you're addressing mental health needs in the community. In my mind, that would be tough on crime because that will long-term prevent crime. But we all know that that's not really what politicians mean.
But crime is going up, right? Or is it not?
So that's a very charged question, right? And I mean, every time there is a little number that jumps, there is somebody on the political spectrum screaming crime has gone up, right? On one hand, yes, every year there are variations. So sometimes it goes a little up, sometimes it goes a little down. Overall, they are stable. There aren't any great leaps. If you just pick up random numbers and you're looking at how many crimes have been committed this year, how many crimes have been committed that year without referring them to population, then it might look like, yes, it's gone up quite a bit. The population has also gone up quite a bit. So then if you're looking at the Statistics Canada, which is probably the most reliable source, and they are calculating rates per 100,000 people, so that would be actually reporting back to the number of population, you're going to note that the way the numbers go up and down, it's not actually huge. What I think is the takeaway is that during all these periods of tough on crime, soft on crime, smart on crime, non-smart on crime, whatever you want to call them, those did not seem to greatly affect the population in terms of the crimes that are being committed.
What you're saying is that crime hasn't drastically gone up, but we're at a point in time where not only are the conservatives saying we have to be tough on crime, crime is a problem, but the governing Liberals are also saying the same. So the political consensus is that it's a problem.
Obviously, horrific things are happening and they make the news. And crime is one of those things where everybody has an opinion on, even though, they might not actually be that familiar with what's going on the ground. I think it just naturally digs into some of people's deepest fears, right? I mean, I think that's normal. I think we're all afraid that there's the strangers lurking in the bush that's going to come and attack us and rob us. And couple that with the fact that some people have, in fact, been victims of crime, right? And they have first-hand experience with that. On one hand, the scariness of crime is real. It's not just a perception. Its frequency and likelihood to happen, at least in Canada, that might be distorted by the very significant headlines that every time a crime is committed is making, right? Nobody's going to report on the fact that, the crimes have dropped again this year, or, there are so many people that are wasting away in prison, and yet this doesn't correspond to the number. That doesn't make headlines, and what's a politician going to do with those things? However, when you see something that's really upsetting to the population, and rightfully so, that's being exploited for political gains, right? And that's not new. That's something that has been always done. That's nothing new.
I want to show you something that I saw the other day from the Toronto Police Association. Over 100 charges, 3 people stabbed, dozens of breaches, yet somehow this individual was still out on the streets. This is catch and release in action, a broken system that puts violent offenders back into our communities and leaves our members to deal with the consequences. Enough is enough. And the post goes on. So that's from the Toronto Police Association. It's an association that represents about 8,000 civilian and uniform members. And then we have another post from the Toronto Police. And they're actually saying things like, so far in 2025, shootings are down 21%. Firearm charges are down 49%. Auto thefts decreased by nearly 41%. How do you make sense of this?
I can tell you they're not conflicting. One random dude could have had 100 charges and be on the streets, sure. While on the other hand, everything else is going down. I don't think that they don't correspond to each other. I think it's what we make out of them, right? So I think that one association is using one individual case that, is making headlines. And clearly, the fact that it stands out is just that. It stands out. That's probably not the norm. That's set aside, and you look at the other, that probably is a reflection of the general trends. Certain crimes are actually going down, or certain things. And again, I don't know if I would put a lot of bases in something like, oh my gosh, crime is down. Again, as I mentioned, they are variables. They depend on how you're calculating them. The point is, there's nothing horrendously worse happening this year than it did last year. That's all I'm saying, right? It's bad things are happening. People that shouldn't be released are released. A lot of people that should be released are not released. It's really interesting that you put them, in parallel, because it shows that you have essentially, for the same year, you can pull up whatever numbers you want and make a story around it.
It really warps your perception.
It does. It does. And what it is that's going to draw your attention more, right? I mean, I am concerned of the role that reputable media outlets are playing in perpetuating these myths. I understand that this is what people read. Crime always sells. To hear facts of things that have happened right now, taken by the media, exploited, made into very big stories that sometimes are bigger than they are, sometimes are tragic events. Not every tragic event requires a systemic intervention. Having knee-jerk reactions like, oh, somebody has stabbed somebody else, let's basically put them all in prison and throw away the key, without actually looking into whether that works, might not actually be the right approach.
Well, what I've heard time and time again is that what went wrong is that the Liberals were soft on crime and that they had a soft on crime agenda, and that's what's gotten us here. Is there any truth to that?
The last government, Liberal government, was that initially they were running on a smart, what they call the smart on crime agenda, which was dubbed by the Conservatives to be a soft on crime agenda, which again, unfortunately, it was neither. I'm not going to lie, neither soft nor smart. The idea is that because of that, the crime rates have increased. That's actually not true. There is no evidence to support that anything that the Liberal government has done over the last 10 years. And I say that without actually being very supportive of what the Liberal government has done regarding crime over the last 10 years. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that nothing they have done have impacted crime going up. That's not really supported by the numbers that we have.
I hear people like Pierre Poilievre calling Justin Trudeau's quote unquote catch and release policy, like insinuating that it's so easy to get in and out of jail, but bail didn't have that much of an impact?
You can only discuss or assess the impact that the legislation has when it's applied properly. The problem is that we did have our regular bail system is not one that has a very strong connection with the Charter and the Constitution, right? You cannot just randomly pick off people off the streets because you have a suspicion and have them in prison awaiting trial, because that does breach their charter rights. And charter rights are there to protect everyone, including people that we might find unsavory, not just the majority. It's in fact, they're there to protect especially people that we don't like. So yes, there will be situations where people will need to be detained because they might be a proven risk of not showing up for trial or for offending again. So in those situations, then yes, in those situations, you will probably need to hold them. But those should be absolutely exceptional situations. And that's what the former bail system or our general bail system, the way it's been conceived, it's supposed to do, to ensure that only when absolutely necessary are people held in custody. That goes back to the Charter of 82. So it's not something that just happened since 2015 onwards, right? But the problem is that it's never been applied in the spirit in which the legislation has been created. So if we're looking at the rates of people that are remanded, which means people that are awaiting a trial in prison, we're going to see that those rates are extremely high. So, for instance, in Nova Scotia, 70% of people that are in provincial custody are actually not sentenced, are awaiting trial. So that's a very high number. Ontario has similar numbers as well. So clearly, remand is not used as little as the legislation suggests that it should be used. It's rather used a lot. So a lot of the factors that are being said and suggested by the new proposals for legislation that are going to strengthen the bail system and make it tougher to come out, all those factors are already considered by the judges.
So what about Mark Carney, who's planning on reversing some of the bail reform? So what you're saying is even those reversals wouldn't impact crime?
Yes, it will have an impact, not on crime, because there's literally no evidence that this strict keeping more people on remand like we have so far has actually reduced crime in any kind of way. But what will happen is that there are going to be a lot more people awaiting trial in remand. It costs us about $200,000 a year to keep somebody in prison, and that's out of our taxpayers' pockets. So that's a very expensive thing that's not going to go in community resources or actual help for people. It's just going to go to keep them caged. They're not going to be able to put forward the proper defense. They are not going to be pro-social. They are not going to have family ties. They are not going to have employment. They are going to go to trial, and the likelihood is much higher to be convicted if you are in pretrial for various reasons. But you still get released eventually, right? Like you're still going to end up being released, whether it's going to be before trial or after you serve your sentence. The difference is that you're coming out without having benefited of any supports to actually help you have that proactive life. So that's why I would say that, no, I would be shocked if any of this strengthening and making it harder for people to be released and engage with the community is going to have any positive effect on crime. It's highly unlikely that it's going to have a positive impact.
It's performative, right?
It is performative. And again, there are so many studies that are there. What's shown is like, addressing criminogenic factors, what it is that makes people offend. What makes people offend is poverty, significant and unaddressed mental health problems, racism, anti-black black racism, indigenous racism, the foster care systems. The foster care system is the pipeline to prisons currently, right? So if you're not changing those things, you can do whatever you want to the justice system. It's only going to perpetuate the revolving door. People are coming out even more destitute with even more discriminated against, with no possibilities of employment.
I think a lot of people are going to hear this and think that solving poverty is some fantastic utopian solution. Like we all want poverty to go away, but that we need some kind of immediate solutions.
I don't think that anything that I've said is utopian. I think they can all be implemented. The problem is that they will take a long time to see the effects. And even the solutions that I'm going to mention right now, they will produce results, but they are generational.
That's the key there, right?
So you're not going to see those results tomorrow. And you also don't see any results, as I mentioned, by strengthening the bail system. But it does sound a lot better. Like it sounds like, because instinctively people think that, cracking down on people who commit crime is actually the solution. It seems counterintuitive to start in the community to address crime, or to start in childhood to address adult crime, but it's not. So solutions, a universal basic income, strengthening the universal healthcare, fixing the healthcare system concretely, And those are various steps that can be done. And I'm hoping that more of that is going to come. And as that happens, we're probably going to see a decrease in crime, especially when we look at the mental health care system, right? Having early interventions in the foster care system, ensuring that Indigenous mothers get the support they need and stay with their children, as opposed to their children getting taken. Instead of taking the children, having that support, not child protection, which is actually separating mothers from their children, but actually having a supportive, non-state-based organization, funding non-governmental organizations that can actually support people and find support plans when they get bail, provide housing for these people, to support them, to help them get employment. There is so much evidence that when you provide people with housing, with support for their addictions, with employment, they are not going to reoffend. People don't wake up in the morning saying, oh, I'm so excited to commit an offense. People wake up in the morning and say, I'm so hungry. It might not be, something that I'll see the result in the next 10 years, but my children will have a lot safer community because of that. So I'm willing to wait that amount of time. But in the meanwhile, we're tinkering at the margins of the problem with various patchworks, and even the ones that are positive are so tiny that are not making a difference. And instead, we're just fighting over we're smart on crime, on tough on crime, and really wasting our money.
Hearing what you just laid out to me, and then putting that side by side with Mark Carney's platform, I think it's safe to assume that none of your solutions have shown up on Mark Carney's crime platform. Does it frustrate you?
Yes, it does. Full disclosure, I voted Liberal because that's, that it hurts. Like, it genuinely hurts to go in and vote for that. Like, it's actually painful. A little part, every time I go in and vote Liberal, a little part of me dies, to be quite honest. But I see voting as a harm reduction measure because for me, the crime agenda matters so much, right? But unfortunately, when it comes to looking at how am I going to vote based on the crime agenda that they are putting forward, or the criminal justice agenda, it's always a harm reduction choice. It's quite devastating, to be honest, that I cannot find a single party in any of the elections I voted that had a decent criminal justice platform that would resonate.
This conversation it's really hard because you talked about this tension a little bit earlier, because it's hard not to hear the concerns of victims. It's almost sometimes painful to think about the rights of the accused in moments where things just are extremely devastating, especially to think about the rights of those who are convicted. But you've stressed to me how important it is to consider them regardless. Maybe you can talk to me a little bit about this tension.
I don't think there's a tension. I think that the pain and the horribleness through which victims are going through every day, it's significant and it's devastating and needs to be acknowledged. And also, I will tell you that a lot of the victims are telling you that they are re-victimized by the justice system itself. And that the criminal justice system in which they are asking for, justice is actually not giving them that. It's very rare that I've heard the victim, even when the individual has been convicted to the maximum possible sentence, I've rarely heard the victim coming and saying, I've been vindicated. And the reason for that is because the justice system doesn't really have a very strong place for the victims and for their voices, right? I don't think that strengthening and going harder on the accused is actually going to give victims the vindication that they think, because the vindication that they need is to have their voices heard, to be involved in the process, to be part of what's happening. You can address the criminogenic factors that lead to crime without actually putting people away for their lifetime or denying them bail, and having the victim heard adequately. Right now, we're not doing either well. And it's not one because of the other. It's because we're were doing very poorly at both of them, both hearing the victim and acknowledging and dealing with what causes crime. And again, Mark Carney's agenda, it's like they're not actually solving the injustice that's happening to victims time and again.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about these issues and about my work and to criticize everybody. It's lovely.
It really is, isn't it? That's been this episode of Canadian Politics. If you like this episode, please leave us a like, a comment, subscribe. You can leave us a rating and review in any of the podcast apps of your choosing. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.